Okay, hello. Hello, everybody. We are going to make a start now. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, there we go.
Perfect. Okay, I'll start. Welcome, everyone. We're going to make a start. First of all, we're going to introduce ourselves. So, my name is Will. I'm a first-year accounting and finance student.
And my name's Chloe. I'm a second year, and I do health and medical science.
Awesome. So, welcome to Good News. For those that don't know, this is the events week run by the Christian Union. We've got a wide range of talks, activities, trying to create conversations with people on campus. The aim of Events Week is to allow every student on campus to hear and respond to the good news, which is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Yeah.
So today we have a very exciting talk about does God and science contradict each other with our lovely speaker, Sharon. So just before we get into it, we do have a few logistical things to go through.
So really quickly, in the case of a fire, we've got fire exits along the back. If you go out those doors, the meeting point is the piazza. There's also ones along the back where the meeting point is route. Then also, if for any accessibility needs, if you go to the Chancellor's Bar, which is right through there, that is a meeting point where a community safety member will come and find you and assist you. Secondly, if you could turn your phones off, that would be really great, just to allow Sharon to talk without any disturbance. So if you could do that, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, also we are taking photos throughout the event for our social medias. If you don't want to be in any pictures, that is totally fine. Please go and grab an orange lanyard, which Jethro is holding. There's some back on the tech desk there. And if you're wearing one of those, we'll make sure you're not in any of the pictures.
Awesome. I think
we're ready to begin. So we could invite Sharon up, and please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Chloe. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Great to see you and to have this time together. Thanks for coming to spend your lunchtime hearing what someone might say to the question of whether or not science has cancelled God or whether science and God contradict each other. I think that was the Slido QR code that was just up there. This is a really important question. It was a really important question for me. I actually did not, so I'm a Christian now, but I have not always been a Christian. Growing up, I didn't really know what I believed about God. It wasn't something that was particularly talked about. What I did know was that I believed in the sciences. I loved every science. I did all three as soon as I could. I always did my maths homework first. I didn't really like English and history. I wasn't very good at them either. So I knew that I loved the sciences, and I actually, I remember my A-level biology teacher who made a big impression on me, giving me a copy of a book by Richard Dawkins, telling us that we are, biological machines, and essentially that was it. and that had a really big impression on me. And I remember arriving at university at your age, kind of an agnostic, I'd probably just have described myself as. But somehow I had absorbed the view that God and science were not compatible with each other. Now, I don't think anybody outright sort of told me this. I think that I managed to absorb it from the friends that I had, from the books that I was handed, there was no social media in that time, but, from magazines and TV and so on. And I had assumed that God and science were not compatible with each other. And in my very first week at university, I was there to study biochemistry, by the way. I did an undergrad in biochemistry, And actually, after that, went on to do a PhD in brain imaging at the University of Cambridge. So I've spent actually over a decade in the sciences, but I started it not as a Christian, studying biochemistry. And in my first week, I was invited to an event called Guerrilla Christian. And what that was nothing to do with barbecuing, but there was 4 Christians in a row, a really full room. And I listened to everyone else ask their own questions, and then halfway through the evening, I put my hand up and asked my own question, which was, surely you can't believe in God and be a scientist at the same time. And I was essentially, voicing what I think a lot of people think is that you have to either choose science or God. You either have to choose kind of the mechanisms of nature or this weird superstitious belief in a being that somehow magicked it all into existence. And I was actually given the answer that, yes, you can. You can actually believe in God and be a credible, in fact, brilliant scientist. And it's a bit like, asking someone to choose between God and science is a bit like asking somebody to choose between these 2 reasons as to why Amazon exists. Either because Amazon has a website and a delivery system and all the processes that undergird it, or because Jeff Bezos exists. Choose. And of course, you look at that for 1 second and you realize, I don't need to choose. Those are 2 mutually compatible reasons as to why Amazon exists. One is describing the underlying mechanisms, and the other describes the being whose idea it was, the person who set it up in his garage in the 1990s. And actually, if you try and understand Amazon just in terms of its website and coding and processes, and you don't make any reference to Jeff Bezos, you actually come away with a diminished understanding of reality, of Amazon. And so it's no different with God and science. There's no contradiction between the study of nature's mechanisms, which are beautiful and intricate and elegant, and I got to spend over a decade of my life doing that, and belief in the God whose idea it was, who set it all in motion and continues to uphold it today. There's no logical contradiction between those 2 things. In fact, you could argue that just as you come away with a limited view of Amazon if you leave out Jeff Bezos, you end up with a limited view of reality if you leave out its maker. And that is what I came to discover at the beginning of this biochemistry course, and that set me kind of grilling a lot more Christians, actually, and asking a lot more questions for the next year and a half, and I'll say more about my journey in a minute. The question of whether science has cancelled God is a really important one, because science and medicine and technology are held in very high esteem, and rightly so. Because they have enabled things like AI to be invented, for better or worse. They have sent people into space. They have sequenced every gene in the human body. They have developed the internet. And they have improved the length and quality of human life in so many different ways. And it is absolutely right that they be held in high esteem. But just because science is extraordinary and can do all kinds of extraordinary things, but there are also, has that removed the need for God? There are also lots of questions that science cannot answer that still leave room for the possibility of philosophy and theology and the possibility of God. And so it is not the case that the study of mechanisms in nature has removed the need for God. And I want to show you some of the questions actually that science can't answer, which is why we still need these other perspectives on life. So the first question being, can science tell us why science even works? How is it that we can even do this thing called science? And actually, that very question is not a scientific question. That is a philosophical question. Now, many things are needed for science to be possible, but I'll highlight two things here. Firstly, for science to be possible, the natural world needs to be regular and ordered. There needs to be an underlying regularity and stability and predictability. If you are a scientist here, I don't know, who here is studying a scientific subject? Yeah, quite a few people in the room. If you were to set up a study here at Warwick University, and you know you're onto something, you know that you actually have got something here, and you actually go and set up the exact same study in a different university, maybe Birmingham or somewhere in London, what should you find? You should find the same results. Right, it's almost so obvious we don't even think about it, but there's an underlying order to the natural world without which you couldn't repeat any study or test any theory. Now, where does that order come from? Where does that regularity come from? Where do the most persuasive explanations lie for that very order that we find in nature? And there are a number of scientists who made significant contributions to the scientific revolution in the Renaissance and beyond. And it was actually their belief in God that propelled forward their science. It was the very expectation that they should find order in nature because they believed that there was an orderer behind it. These are people like Johannes Kepler for his work on planetary motion, Isaac Newton, Kelvin, Gregor Mendel for his genetics on pea plants, and Francis Bacon, and so on. These were all God-fearers. And it was precisely their belief in God that propelled forward their science. The children's author, C.S. Lewis, and he wrote other books as well, said that men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. And so there are actually many influential scientists whose beliefs have actually inspired their science. Above the door of the old and the new Cavendish laboratory, the Department of Physics at the University of Cambridge, are some words from the Bible. They are from Psalm 111. The Psalms are like a set of songs that sit quite just about in the middle of the Bible. And one particular psalm, verse 111, verse 2, says this: "Great are the works of the Lord. They are pondered by all who delight in them." And those words were put there by the first Cavendish professor of physics, James Clerk Maxwell, who was a Scottish scientist known for his work on electromagnetic theory, who saw his science as a means of pondering the work of God. He didn't see a contradiction at all between his belief in God and his science. Actually, science was in fact pondering the things that God had made already. And today we could point to people like Francis Collins, who was responsible for the vaccine rollout in the USA during the pandemic and was the former head of the Human Genome Project and the director of NIH, which is the big research funding body in the States. And he became a Christian as an adult. And he says this: "God is most certainly not threatened by science. He made it possible." And so actually a case can be made that there are scientists on both sides of this debate. There are scientists that believe that science has cancelled God, and there are scientists that believe that God is the one that makes science possible in the first place. So that's one aspect. You need a regularity to the natural world in order to test and repeat experiments and so on. The other thing that we need for science to be possible is cognitive reliability. We need minds that are capable of making sense of the world that we live in. And actually, we have the capacity to be incredibly rational and to investigate the natural world and to make sense of it. And so where does the human mind come from? Have you ever thought about that for a minute? It's an extraordinary thing. And of course, a lot of people like to say that you are just your brain, which incidentally, I wrote a book to kind of respond to this called Am I Just My Brain? I have a copy of it with me if anybody would like it. You can have it for free. Yeah, are we just our brains? Some people say that the mind is just the brain. But the problem is, how do non-conscious neurons give rise to conscious minds? How exactly? The neurons inside your head are not themselves conscious. They are not minds. And somehow you are a conscious human being with a mind. How does that happen? And this is actually not a done deal. This is not something that scientists have solved conclusively. This is something that's been debated since the ancient world. And of course, I think if we are just packs of neurons, then life looks a lot duller. And there's a lot more that I could say about that. But what is the most persuasive explanation for why we find ourselves here as conscious thinking beings? You see, if God does not exist, so I'm just going to go back. If God does not exist, then we live in a non-conscious universe of time plus matter plus chance. And somehow conscious humans have arisen from within that non-conscious universe. Now, that's not impossible, but it's kind of surprising, because all you have to work with is matter. However, if God exists, we did not begin with a non-conscious universe. We've lived in a conscious universe all along, because before there was anything physical, there was God. There was a divine mind. And through him, all things were made. In other words, you could make a case that the very existence of the human mind is actually very unnatural to materialism. And yet it is very natural to theism. In other words, the very fact that we have minds that we use in the pursuit of the sciences makes more sense if God exists, because our minds are kind of imprints from the divine mind. And so this is why some people say not only is it not the case that science has cancelled God, but you could make a case that God is the reason why science is even possible in the first place, which is why people like Richard Swinburne, Emeritus Professor of Philosophy at the University of Oxford, has said, note, I am not postulating a God to explain, not postulating a God of the gaps, a God merely to explain the things that science has not yet explained. I am postulating a God to explain why science explains. And so this question, how is it that we can even do science, actually is a pointer again towards God. Because the order in nature and the order in the human mind arguably make more sense if they're traceable to an orderer behind it. Now, another question to ask is this: can science answer our biggest, most fundamental questions? Because even if all of the questions that we have in physics and chemistry and biology and molecular biology and psychology and so on, even if all of those questions can be answered, our most fundamental questions of life will still remain unanswered. Questions like, why are we here? What is it all about? Does my life matter? Am I loved? None of these are scientific questions, but they are very, very important questions. And they are ones that it's very important to spend time on and to answer. You know, the Nobel laureate, Sir Peter Medawar, said on the limits of science. He said the existence of a limit to science is made clear by its inability to answer childlike elementary questions having to do with first and last things. Questions such as, how did everything begin? What are we all here for? What is the point of living? You see, cosmologists tell us very beautifully how the universe began. But they can't answer the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Why do I exist at all? I actually found myself asking that question as a child, having not been raised in a religious home at all, slightly bored, staring out of the window, suddenly was aware of my own consciousness. Why am I here? There wasn't any religious priming to cause that. I don't know, maybe you've had questions as well. And this has been a week to explore them, and there'll be other opportunities to do that. But you know, scientifically speaking, if we just look at the scientific narrative, human beings are unbelievably insignificant. We live in a universe that's been around for 14 billion years. The Earth has been around for 4 or so billion years. Homo sapiens has been around for 200,000 years, which is a blink in the eye of the overall age of the cosmos. And if you were to view the period from the start of the universe until the arrival of Homo sapiens as a 24-hour period, we arrived at 11:59 p.m. and 59 seconds. We are a blink in the eye. We are so insignificant, and that's the entire human race. So one human life, even less so. Honestly, if we take the scientific narrative on its own, you're so insignificant. And so why do we find ourselves asking questions of human significance? Why do we write songs like this? What was I made for? The soundtrack to the recent Barbie movie. I used to float, now I just fall down. I used to know, but I'm not sure now what was I made for? What was I made for? Taking a drive, I was an ideal, looked so alive. Turns out I'm not real, just something you paid for. What was I made for? You see, if the materialists are right and the natural world is all that there is, why bother asking the question? We're just a blip on the landscape, that's it. But actually, these questions keep coming up, and that raises the question, why? Why do they keep coming up? Maybe it's because there is ultimate meaning to this world. Maybe it's because your life does actually matter, that you are significant. And those things make a lot more sense if there's a divine being that's made you, that loves you, and says you're not an accident and you're not here by accident. You see, the sciences cannot answer our biggest, most fundamental questions. To get answers to those, you need to look beyond the sciences, to philosophy, to theology, to the possibility of God. And finally, before we go into a time of questions, can science answer the God question itself? It can't. You know, the question of whether or not God exists is arguably the most important question you could ever ask. Because if he does exist, it actually changes everything. You know, Christians believe that Jesus actually was raised from the dead. And that's either true, if it happened, it's true for all of us. That actually he's the forerunner, and those that follow him, the same will happen to them. Well, that's not just a case of my truth, your truth. That actually is either true for all of us or for none of us. So this actually really matters. But the problem is with the whole faith question is that people assume that people of faith are a bit irrational, and to be a person of faith is to take a blind leap into the dark and believe slightly weird, slightly strange things that make no sense of life and certainly don't seem to engage one's scientific brains. Faith is something you exercise against your better judgment. It is something that you will yourself to do and throw logic out of the window. And as Richard Dawkins said a long time ago in the 1990s, faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith is belief in spite of, even perhaps because of, the lack of evidence. Well, if we take the face value meaning of faith, we just take that to mean trust, right? Faith equals trust in something or someone. Well, if we take it to mean that, then actually everybody has faith in something. We place our trust in all kinds of things: parents, friends, aeroplanes, doctors, even scientific theories. But we don't exercise that faith or that trust in the absence of evidence. We do it precisely on the basis of the evidence to support it. You might have a high level of trust in someone that has shown themselves to be trustworthy and reliable. But you might have a low level of trust in someone that's been flaky and has let you down. But either way, the level of trust is based on the evidence to support it. You see, everyone has faith in something, and nobody exercises that faith blindly. And it is actually the same with Christian faith. To be a Christian is actually to place your trust in a person, not simply a principle or a religious ritual, but a person who has shown themselves to be utterly trustworthy. And when people put their faith in Jesus in Jerusalem, in biblical times, that was not in the absence of evidence. That was on the basis of this man who treated people like no one else had, who restored the dignity of people on the outside, people who were on the fringes, who were dishonored. And somebody that was able to actually do extraordinary things, heal people, even raise them from the dead as well, and then go on to do the same himself. When people put their faith in Jesus in those days, it was not a blind act. It was a response to a person that had demonstrated themselves to be trustworthy. And although we don't have a walking, living, breathing Jesus right here in front of us now, we have actually a means to look at him, to look at his life. Actually, I know you've got copies of Uncover Luke on your tables. This is a historical document that if you want to question its reliability, you actually have to start questioning the reliability of every other historical document out there. All historians agree that Jesus existed, whether they believe in God or not. They just disagree on whether he rose from the dead. They believe he lived and he died. And if you want to really understand what Jesus is like and what he says about human value and about you, I really encourage you to read it. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. And that's actually what I did as well. And actually, what's interesting, the author of Luke's Gospel, Luke, was a physician. He was a doctor. He was a medically trained man who didn't see a contradiction between using his mind in the sciences and believing that Jesus was who he said he was. In another biography, Mark's biography, we see Jesus engaging with someone who was very skeptical, who wanted concrete evidence. There was actually a follower called Thomas who said unless he wouldn't believe the other disciples that Jesus had risen, after Jesus had risen, he wouldn't believe them. And he said, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and into his side as well, I will not believe. And this is Caravaggio, the Renaissance artist, capturing the moment when Jesus appears to Thomas and gives him exactly the evidence that he asks for. And actually, if you're wondering whether God exists or not, he's not actually playing games with us. He's not trying to play sort of hide and seek. If you really want to know, it's all right to say, if you're real, then show me. Because that's actually what Jesus did in Thomas' life, and we have that documented. Our questions matter. Our need for evidence matters. He's not asking us to take a blind leap into the dark. He says, examine the evidence. Have a look for yourself and go where the evidence leads you. Take a scientific approach to it. And that is basically what I did after another 18 months of asking all of my questions. Actually, I still have questions, but I got to a point where I realized that actually Jesus was real. He was who he said he was. I wasn't being asked to choose between God and science. I could see a community of people around me that lived in a really compelling way. And about halfway through this biochemistry degree, I decided to follow Jesus. I decided to put my trust in him, not in the absence of evidence, not a blind leap, actually a step towards a person that had shown themselves to be trustworthy. And actually, it was amazing to continue in the sciences, which I did for another decade, studying the molecular workings of the world, and then people's brains. I worked in human cocaine abuse at one point as a postdoc in brain imaging. Just extraordinary to be studying the mechanisms of nature, but also to know the God behind it all. And that actually added to my science. It didn't take away from it. But I came to the realization that Jesus loved me. He had died for me, and he wanted to walk with me in life. And he welcomed me into the lab because he was there already. And the same is on offer to you. This is actually open to anyone and everyone. God does not have favorites. He does not have a certain club of people that are in and other people that are out. Everyone that wants to be in a relationship with Jesus can be. And so I really want to encourage you, if that is something that you actually at the end of this week, listening to lots of different talks, actually would like to turn to Jesus, then I know that the members of the host team here would love to pray with you, would love to meet with you and talk with you after this. I would also love to do that, so please come up and talk to me as well. But I cannot recommend it highly enough to you. I think it is the difference between life and death. And the Apostle John, who wrote another biography, I've talked about 3 of the biographers in this talk, said, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. There's a lot that he did that isn't written down, but there's enough written down. These are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. I don't know how life has gone for you, but here is the offer of life in the name of Jesus. It is yours for the taking. Do you want it? It made all the difference to my life, and the hosts of this week of events will say the same to you. Thank you for listening.
Yes, we're on. Thank you so much, Sharon. That was really awesome. Definitely lots of things to think about. So yeah, we're now going to move to a time of...
over here, so I'm a bit closer.
Yes, let's do that. Perfect. We're going to move time to question and answer. So if you can get out your phones, if you have a question, scan the QR code, put it in, and then Sharon will answer a few of them.
Tried to do it earlier. Here we go. Just going to get my glasses.
Yes.
I'm blind.
Definitely keep asking questions. We'll make a start. We've got the first one of, does the proof of evolution contradict Adam and Eve?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question, and really important to ask it. I was asking the same thing myself, particularly in biochemistry. I was being told about, the evolution of hemoglobin and all of these different kind of molecular structures and how they've sort of evolved. And of course, we know I was, virology, about how viruses are constantly evolving and adapting and so on. And so this was my kind of bread and butter. And so the question of evolution and its compatibility with the biblical kind of account was really important. And what I want to say to you is it is possible to be a Christian and to believe a number of different things about how you interpret the book of Genesis in terms of how God made the world. There are some Christians that take that book very literally and say that actually the world came into being very supernaturally over a very short period of time. There are some Christians that believe that. Then there are some Christians that actually would call themselves old earth creationists, so that they believe that actually we accept cosmology telling us the universe is very old, geology tells us the earth is very old, but there are natural and supernatural processes involved in that. And then there's also a group of Christians that might describe themselves as evolutionary creationists. And they would say that those 6 days in Genesis, it's not a scientific textbook. This is not a scientific account of how it happened. This is actually talking about who God is in relation to the surrounding beliefs of the time, which were polytheistic, which believed there were many gods of nature. And the author of Genesis is trying to help people see, no, there's one God who created the natural world, but nature itself is not divine. That was the purpose of this book. And therefore, it can be taken as an account of things that really happened, but in a non-literal way. And so that was really helpful to me, because I realized I wasn't being asked to choose between a theory and God. That's not a choice that God was asking me to make. In terms of Adam and Eve, I think that it can easily be taken, like somebody might have, lots of people have written poems about the Second World War. They're writing about events that really happened, but in a creative way, so that if you try and read that poem literally, you're going to miss its meaning. But it is talking about historical events, and that's how I think how Genesis is meant to be read. So Adam and Eve, I believe, there were certain humans that played a pivotal role in terms of how humanity relates to God and what went wrong and what needed fixing. But they're not necessarily described literally. So I think it is possible to both hold to the integrity of what the Bible is saying and also your discipline of science at the same time. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, the next one got quite a few likes on this one. So what is the scientific evidence Jesus rose from the dead?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question. So there are, basically, there's an empty tomb that they've never found a body. And also there are over 500 people were reported to have seen Jesus over a 40-day period. And also some skeptics, for example, Saul of Tarsus, and actually one of Jesus' brothers, who were skeptics at the time of his death, actually changed their mind. They became followers of him because they were convinced they'd seen the risen Christ. There are kind of a number of, there's an approach called the minimal facts approach, which is basically where a kind of philosopher take the facts that most, that historians, even if they don't believe in Jesus, they don't believe that he rose, they would agree on those facts. And I've just listed a few for you there. Now, people come up with objections, that responses to these. And one of them is that, weren't the disciples, the people that thought they saw the risen Christ, were they just hallucinating? But actually, lots and lots of people saw the risen Jesus. And actually, those of you studying psychology will know that mass hallucinations are not a thing. A hallucination is a very private, subjective thing. And also, the historical record is that people had these sightings over this short period, and then they stopped because Jesus returned to the Father and sent the Holy Spirit, and that's how the church speaks of Jesus being alive today. So these appearances happen very, very rapidly, and then they stopped. And that's not the pattern of hallucinating either. You normally, if you're hallucinating, you have it regularly over your lifetime, or at least over a lifetime. And so hallucination doesn't seem to quite fit. And another theory is that maybe Jesus didn't die. There is a theory out there that maybe he sort of feigned death. But important to say, no historian believes this. And lots of these historians are atheists and agnostics. They all believe Jesus died. He died by crucifixion. The Romans were very good at killing people. He was definitely dead. And in any case, a half-dead Jesus was never going to inspire the kind of devotion that happened afterwards in these disciples. Another idea is maybe the disciples actually made up the story. They kind of just invented the story that Jesus had risen to make it sound good. But the thing with this idea is, all of the followers of Jesus went on from, at the point of Jesus' death, they were terrified, they were hiding away, they didn't know what to do, they were locked in rooms and just didn't want to come out. When they realized Jesus had risen, they were transformed into people that were boldly speaking about what Jesus had done before crowds, and they all ended up dying horrible deaths for what they believed, including, so Peter, one of Jesus' closest friends, was crucified upside down, so like even worse than Jesus himself, in terms of the physical agony. And so the thing that convinced, so my husband became a Christian as a student as well. He was studying computer science over in Cambridge, and this was the thing that convinced him. What was it that persuaded these guys? And actually, the logical conclusion is that Jesus really did rise. There's so much more I could say about that. Why would you die for a lie? Why would you actually give up your life for something that you didn't actually believe happened? They really believed they'd seen the risen Jesus. And so, there's a lot of compelling evidence out there. I would recommend you read The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. He actually was a Chicago Tribune journalist who went on to investigate the evidence for the resurrection and came to the conclusion that it was true. I recommend that to you.
Brilliant, thank you. Another similar question, which again also has a lot of likes, is there evidence that Noah's flood was real?
Thank you so much for that question. I think that really, really, really good question to ask. I think that what we seem to see in the creative narratives of the time, obviously we're talking about events that were kind of almost prehistorical kind of era, but they all do seem to document some sort of cataclysm in one part of the world. Now, I think Christians may differ on their interpretation of whether they see that as a literal kind of flood covering the whole earth, or whether it was a regional flood that, because people were kind of localized and not traveling around in the way that we are today, that would seem like the whole earth. So I think that there are definitely accounts of in history of a cataclysmic flood. So I think there is some legitimacy to that. Thank you for the question.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Next one. Why would God wait 14 billion years before humans came onto the scene?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's a particularly pertinent question in our day and age. I'm just going to say this. I have children your age. I have a 19-year-old, actually down in Exeter and a 17-year-old. And they were saying to me, Amazon Instant Video is not very instant, is it? It's like you have to click and then you have to wait for it to download. And that's like, instant means like right there at your fingertips. And I said, did you know that like 20 years ago, if you want to watch a movie, you have to get in your car, you drive to the video place called Blockbuster, you choose out your VHS thing, you walk to the counter, you pay for it, and you drive back home again. And you've got it for like a day. That there's a sense in which we are actually used to things being at our fingertips and having them instantly, such that it seems like something that takes very little time is surely the best way. But it also occurred to me as I've pondered this question myself, the things that really matter most to us, we take more time over. I think, and like some of the most meaningful gifts I've been given have been things that people have made for me, and it's taken them a while. And there's something in the fact that they were willing to take that time that communicates value to me, what I mean to them. And so I don't know is the answer to your question, but I wonder if there's something in the fact that God is okay with process, and also he wanted to take time over things that really matter. And he had time, so he took it. I don't think it's necessarily a negative sign that God took time. Thank you for the question.
Great, so I think we'll just go for one more question because we don't want to overrun too much. But just to say there are loads of amazing questions here. And if you didn't get your question answered, please stick around to chat to people. As Sharon already said, she will also be around and is very happy to come and chat through any questions you have. So yeah, apologies if your question didn't get answered in this section, but please do stick around to chat through any questions you have. So for the final question, we are going for, if science shows that there is a system of rules and it doesn't contradict God, what then can explain the various miracles that occurred? Interventions, maybe?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. So I think that's a really, really important question. And I think the important thing to say again is that sometimes the faulty dilemma here is like either the laws of nature or God did it. But actually, really important to say that the laws of nature are often, some philosophers have referred to them as like these fixed certainties that cannot be broken, that cannot be violated. But actually, laws of nature are probabilistic. They describe what happens 99% of the time. If I had some chocolates, which I often do when I'm speaking about miracles, if I were to throw a chocolate to you through the air, the laws of nature describe the trajectory of that chocolate, and that's what it's going to do most of the time. But that doesn't stop you putting your hand up and catching it and taking it a completely different direction. And actually, it's because we understand the laws and what normally happens that we can recognize a miracle when something different happens. Once in a while. You see, I guess if there is no God, if we live in a closed system of cause and effect, then miracles are impossible. But if God exists, then he would be capable of creating a world where there are laws and regularities that science discovers and uncovers, but also occasionally suspending those laws to do something extraordinary. And not because he likes to meddle with nature, but because he cares. That God doesn't meddle with nature as a matter of course. Most of the time it's fixed and kind of regular. But when he does intervene, it's because it's really important. And we see that, in coming into time and space as a human being was really important. That God wanted to come to be with us, to tell us that we are not on our own. There's nothing like communicating the value of a human being like becoming one. That is what Jesus has done, and then dying for us, taking all of our mess and wrongdoing and sin and guilt upon himself, but then leaving it in the grave and rising, so that anyone that follows him, the same can be true of them. That's not a God that likes to meddle with nature. That's a God that steps in because there's no other way. And so you're not being asked to think irrationally by believing in miracles. Science tells you what normally happens, but occasionally God intervenes, and it's through our scientific knowledge that we can recognize the intervention. Thanks so much for that question.
Thank you so much. This has been so excellent. I really enjoyed it. I hope everyone else has too. Can we please give Sharon another round of applause?
Thank you. Thanks.
Like I said, this has been really excellent, but it is not over yet. We have plenty more things today that you guys are very welcome to join us for, including right now we have lunch and our science network, so please do stick around for that. We have plenty of lunch available all over there for everyone to help themselves to. If you have any allergies, I believe all allergens are labeled on the boxes. If you have any other concerns or questions, please talk to one of our stewards and they can help point you in the right direction, but it should all be clear from that sense.
Yes. We also have some more talks today. So at 4:30, we got a talk on why is God on the cross, and 6:30, is there always hope? There's also dinner later, so please do come along. It'll be great to see you guys again.
Yeah, and also we have just some other things that have been talked about already. For example, the Uncover Lukes that are on the tables. You're very welcome to take one of those. They're completely free, and we'd love for you to read those. They are specifically designed to be read alongside another person. They have some prompts, some questions, some discussion points. So if you'd like to do that, please talk to someone maybe that brought you here or someone in a CU hoodie or fleece. We would really, really love to do that with you if you're interested. So please do take one of those away. We also have a whole bookstall in the back corner there where there's plenty of other books and Bibles, also completely free. So we'd really love for you guys to take one of those. You can have a chat to the people who are sitting there, maybe about some of the ones you're particularly interested in. Please take those away and read them. They're a gift to you. And so we also do have a QR code, I believe, that will pop up on the screen. There we are. That's just a feedback form from this event. If everyone could take out their phones and take a scan of that, it's really, really quick just to fill out and give some feedback about how you have found today. So I think that's everything. Other than, we'd just really love for you guys to stick around. Please stay and eat and chat. And like we said before, if you did have a question or have thought of one since that didn't get answered, please do stick around to chat through those and ask those questions. Thank you so much for coming. We're really, really glad you came. And I think that's everything for this.